Hey guys, and welcome. We are still at the devcom, and here at the devcom, developers from all around the world can showcase their new game or talk to the audience about a specific topic. And one of those speakers is my next guest. But before we get to know him a little bit better, I want you to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Jarory de Jesus, Puerto Rican and Jamaican narrative designer over at Housemarque. I formerly at Respawn worked on Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Jedi Survivor was a really good, great game. Starting with your job as a technical narrative designer, because I'm wondering, most of our viewers might not know, what does a technical narrative designer do all day?
Yeah, if it makes your viewers feel any better, I don't think half of the industry knows what I do. To sum it up, I really focus on the technical implementation aspects of narrative design. So in my day-to-day, I do a lot of implementing VO, creating systems that allow the voiceover to actually execute at the right time and feel good in the pacing. I do a lot of design in terms of how the story should play out. So we have a writer, right? The writer might write the actual words, but how the player interacts with those words, that's a lot of my domain. So skill sets, usually I'm doing code, but also doing like visual scripting and then placing things in the world, a little bit of level design. And then, of course, I contribute to writing on some occasion as well.
So you're looking at the final product and make it as best enjoyable for the player and make it work.
Exactly. An example of this would be in Star Wars, right? You don't want a VO line playing, like a voiceover line, playing while you're in the middle of combat that is important to the story. So my job might be to block that line from playing until combat's over and then have it queue up so you don't miss the line. That kind of stuff.
That happened to me with a few other games in the past. Like,
exactly.
I gotta admit, and even when it's titled beneath, and I was like, yes, sure. Now I'm looking into the title, what he was saying, even though I can listen to it, and yeah, and then lost the boss fight. Speaking of your work, when did you first thought about working for the gaming industry, and how did you start your career?
Sure. This is actually a kind of serendipitous question. I met the man today responsible for getting me in the games industry, actually, for the first time. I want to say maybe 8 years ago, I had dropped out of grad school. I was doing a PhD in biomedical anthropology. Kind of miserable, hated it, did not want to do academia. I dropped out, taught myself to code, and was working a dead-end programming job that I wasn't really happy at either. And I watched the video from Extra Credits. I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTube series.
No.
It's a YouTube series about game design. It had a long run in the mid-2010s. And they did an episode on game schools, like schools that teach game design. I was like, okay, this seems cool. Is there one near me? Turns out the number 2, now number 1 school in the country for a master's degree in game development is in Orlando, Florida. I was an hour away from there.
Oh.
I applied, got in on a provisional acceptance because in grad school, in undergrad, I wasn't the best student, but they're like, hey, we like your application. As long as you keep above a B, you can stay. So I was like, sure. And I picked up technical design as a sub-discipline. I already have a minor in creative writing, so I've always done writing. And when we got to do our capstone game, we created this title called Scamp, Hi-Hat Havoc. It's actually free on Steam, and I did all the narrative for that game and a lot of the systems to play that narrative. And so I like that character, I created his personality. We modeled him after Rocket Raccoon. And after that, I was able to get my first job on Madden 20. So after that, I got the Marvel Strike Force gig, then Star Wars, and now I'm at Housemarque.
You definitely got some big names in your vita. That would be the next question. Is there any differences between narrating for different genres? Because Marvel is not the same genre like a sports game.
Yeah.
Let's say.
I think all stories are stories. So the difference is in the details, right? In terms of crafting a story, you're trying to do something. Some games want to be more action-oriented, and so you want the story to take a back seat, right? And let the player engage in the action. This is kind of how Housemarque operates. Our stories are built on top of the gameplay. Other games, such as Scamp, the one I worked on, that was built from the story from the ground up. So the story is how we decided on the world, and that became how we decided on the gameplay. And those sort of fed into each other in loops. And so it's very different depending on what the studio wants to do, less so than the type of game, right? It's all about philosophy. working on Star Wars, I came into that project middle of the production. So I didn't really do a lot of the initial character design and pitches, but it was a nice, healthy balance between gameplay and story, and we were able to kind of talk to gameplay, get systems design that kind of complemented the story, and vice versa. So that was quite nice.
Do you have, I mean, like you already mentioned Madden and Star Wars and Marvel. Is there any genre, I'm wondering, which you might want to work in or get some experience in, which you haven't already?
Yeah, I'm a huge RPG fan, and one of the subgenres of that is the tactical RPG. So Fire Emblem, for example, I'm a huge fan of Fire Emblem, and that's a style of game that's a lot of story-driven elements with a lot of interweaving, and kind of like in Fire Emblem, when characters are fighting side by side, you get little bits of narrative. That would be a fun genre to kind of work in for me, I think.
Maybe we see you in the future in this genre.
Possibly.
I'm pressing my thumbs for you. My next question would be already also forcing, or not forcing, focusing on your work. I'm wondering if you have any idols or inspirations, or people that inspire you in the way you narrate games today.
Sure. A couple people come to mind. One is Mary Kenny. She's responsible for some of the narrative on the Spider-Man Miles Morales game. I have the utmost respect for her and her work. I think she does a good job of kind of inclusive storytelling, and that's what I aspire to do. Xalavier Nelson, he's El Paso Elsewhere, which just got a big promotion from ID at Xbox, for example. I think he does an incredible job of creating engaging gameplay loops with unique perspectives on the narrative. And then from like one of those, like, I guess, untouchable, like, people the high up, I don't really have a person, more of a company, but like the old school BioShock, I remember the original BioShock, there's that Andrew Ryan moment with the, like, a man chooses, a slave obeys, and I just want to give a player that experience. And so whoever crafted that is my goal, is to mirror that at some point.
All right. I'm wondering if you can tell us what is the most challenging part when you are creating, or not creating, when you are narrating a video game.
Oh, for me, the most difficult part is communication, because the story all makes sense up here, but it's got to make sense to the player. And before it can make sense to the player, it has to make sense to the team. And so communicating the idea in my head onto paper so the team gets it. Otherwise, there's gonna, it's like a game of telephone, right? So I say something to one person, they say something to the next. By the time it reaches the player, it's a very different vision than what I have in my head. And so being able to effectively communicate what I see, what I understand, what I want to do to the people who are helping execute on that vision, so that the player gets the fullness of the story. It's a big challenge, and I think that's probably the hardest part of creating a narrative in games.
It sounds like a long-term process. How long does it take?
Depends on the size of the game. So Madden, for example, is a 1-year turnaround. So we ship that game every year. And we actually, on Madden, they kind of do like a 3-year roadmap for the story. So every story element builds on the elements of the last game for the next 3 years. So like 20 was building on 19, that kind of thing. Star Wars Jedi Survivor took about 3.5 years, and that was to develop the whole story. But I've known some games, like Persona 5, one of my all-time favorite games, was in development for like 6-8 years. So it really varies depending on how big the game is.
And of course, you want the game to be perfect, so you prefer to take your time and don't rush it because you don't have the need to.
That would be the ideal, but money.
Money and other people who are giving you those deadlines. Before we talk about your passion for hip-hop RPGs, I would like to ask you, which is your go-to game at the moment?
Ooh, I'm kind of torn between 3 games at the moment. I kind of suck between them. So I picked up Inscription because it was free for PlayStation Plus, and I'm loving the gameplay and the kind of subversive nature of that game. Baldur's Gate 3 just came out, and I'm really enjoying the freedom and flexibility and the narrative and how well the characters are fleshed out. It's an incredible game, and I hope I can achieve something like that in my career. And then the third game it's more of a comfort game for me, is I like to go back into the Undertale and Deltarune series, because I love Toby Fox's work. I think he's really brilliant, and I enjoy his world quite a bit.
All right. The next question is, because in my research I found out that you dedicate your spare time to a hip-hop RPG. And when I heard hip-hop RPG, I was like, huh? How does these two things fit together? What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I'm working on a project called Concrete Roads. It's my side project. And it's not a rhythm game, which is the first question I always get, right? Like, I set out to make a game that took from hip-hop as a culture and not as a music. So I borrow elements of the fashion and the lifestyle and to influence the themes of the game, but also the mechanics. The main character is the DJ who fights aliens, and when you're playing a JRPG, I take my turn, you take your turn, and we go back and forth, right? When you're DJing, you usually cue up your music, and then it goes and you do your thing. So I took that and translated it into the RPG world. Instead of going back and forth, I cue up all my actions, and then we see how that plays out, right?
Okay.
So it's taking hip hop and the elements of hip hop and the elements of the art form and translating those into a JRPG formula.
That sounds really interesting. Is there any footage which I can find anywhere?
Not at the moment. I have a prototype that I am developing, and hopefully I'll be able to put that out to the public soon.
I hope too, because like I said, it really sounds interesting, and I would like to take a look into it. Hip hop RPGs is a good keyword because you had a panel yesterday at the devcom where you talked about what designers can learn from hip hop. What would that be?
So, as a storyteller, and I've been writing music in my spare time since I was like 12. I found as I was writing for games and designing stories for games that it was the same thing as writing these rap songs. There's a similar feeling that comes when you're creating this stuff. So I did a deeper dive. What was it about hip hop songs that felt the same? And I realized it's this structure. You introduce a character in like a story heavy hip hop song. It might be the rapper, it might be a different person, a friend, and then you make them care about that character before you even talk about what their problems are. And that's kind of how we want to tell stories in games. Even though we want to thrust the player into the action and have them feel, when we're telling the story, we actually want to get them invested before they start, seeing the drama play out. So we spend Shenmue, the original 1 and 2 are a great example of this. We start with like a little bit of a character drama with Ryu's dad being killed, and then you don't see any combat for a couple hours in the game. Instead, you're just spending time and learning his personality and what he likes, what he doesn't like. And that is kind of how hip-hop works, too. You spend a lot of time engaging with what the character wants. A good example is Lupe Fiasco's Hip Hop Saved My Life. In that first verse, he said, I write...
No problem.
Sorry, stumbled. He said, I write what I see, like to make it like the sights on TV. I like to make it right, don't like where I be. In that one segment, I've learned a lot about this person already. And we haven't even gotten into his struggles that he's going to encounter later in the song. So that was the overlap, and I thought there was a lot I could share with other writers and narrative designers from that perspective.
So it's more like giving the player a smooth experience coming to a game, coming to a story, instead of like other games where the game starts, bang, explosion, drama, apocalypse, and all this stuff.
Right.
And
let's make you care about who you're interacting with first, right? If I start you with an explosion and someone dies, like, who's that character? I don't. Star Wars actually had this problem. One of the biggest criticisms I've gotten on Jedi Survivor when I talk about it to friends is there's a group of characters we kill off in the very beginning of the game, and they're not in the first game, so you've never seen them before, and it's Cal's crew. And the idea is that, this is the crew he's put together in between these games. But you don't get time to get attached to them. You don't get time to learn any of their likes, their interests, or anything. So by the time you leave Coruscant and they die, there's no care there.
I can definitely agree to that, because that was my feeling. You see them when they are standing in this big window, looking at them, and as a player, you sit there and, all right, now they are dead. Mm-hmm. But you can't relate to them really, because it was like you came in, Cal is walking with his guards, and then it was action. And before they came from Coruscant, or they can flee from Coruscant, most of them died. And I was like, okay, but I can't relate to that because I have no
Investment.
Even though he said that, oh no, my friends died. I don't remember. I just remember that it was a woman, but I can't remember her name. There you see how much I can't investigate to that. Who throwing herself in front of Cal so he don't get shot by a blaster. Mm-hmm. She died. He turned around. Oh no, she's dead. But he even not Cal himself took a moment. Okay, you need to flee from Coruscant and all this stuff. But after that, you don't have any other words. It's not mentioned anymore. And so I definitely can relate to that critic.
Exactly. And so my thesis for the hip hop talk was kind of rooted in my experience with that game where, and I loved working on Star Wars. I think we did a great job with the story. I think we did some really cool tricks and some really fun things, but that's a valid criticism. And my thesis is kind of rooted in that experience, right? Like hip hop doesn't do that. There's no way you're going to care about someone's friend getting shot if you don't care about the person. And so that's, Kendrick Lamar has a song called You in his 2015 album To Pimp a Butterfly, where he talks about beefing with a friend because his little cousin got shot and Kendrick wasn't there. And by this point in the song, we've already gone through Kendrick's depression on the issue, so we're kind of invested in why that depression is the case. And so stories are about journeys, and if you start with action and no journey, then there's no reason to connect.
And nothing to memorize after the game.
Exactly.
Like you finished the game, you saw the credits, you put the game away, maybe instantly pick up the next game, and don't even think about anything of the story anymore.
And I'm going to spoil a little bit of Jedi Survivor for the next 2 minutes. So if you guys haven't finished it and you're listening, I'm so sorry. There's a moment at the end where a character dies and Cal is there holding the character. And the spoiler here is that you actually control that character up until the moments of their death. So you kind of switch who you're controlling. And when Cal comes and is holding the dead body of this character and we switch back to Cal, because we were playing and controlling this character and we know the relationship that they have with Cal prior to this, there's an emotional beat there. Like as Cal's crying, you feel the empathy, you kind of want to cry a little bit. And juxtapose that to the earlier scene, right? There's so much more investment because we took our time there. And I think that's a better example of how we can tell these stories.
If I had to guess, I would say it was Seer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there was this moment, because you had this fight with Darth Vader, but the moment where Boat betrayed Cal and all the stuff, I was sitting there, I was streaming it, and then my mouth, I was shocked. Because I never saw that coming, that he betrays the whole team. I was sitting there like arguing with myself. Why didn't he told us, he tried to involve us and we might have found a plan though. No, he betrayed us. Who I don't know, remember the name of the old man who was mentioned in the first part with all these holograms and which suddenly appeared in part 2. I can't even remember his name.
Dagon? You're talking about Dagon? The villain? No.
No, not the villain. The good guy who made all these.
Cordova.
Yeah, that's right. Cordova. I can't remember his name. And seeing him die, then having a Seer fighting Darth Vader and all this stuff, I was shocked.
Yeah, then we did our job as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Like I said, I'm going to memorize this game very, very long. I'm hoping the next one will be as overwhelming as this one. Coming to our last question, I want to take you, because we had your past, we have your time now. I want to take a look into your future. Like I mentioned already, you got big names like Marvel in your Vita, you have Star Wars in your Vita, and you have Madden in your Vita. Is there any other big franchise would you love to work for someday?
I've got 2, actually, to answer that question. The first is I'm a huge Magic the Gathering fan. I love the card game, and I think the world is incredible and so rich in exploration of ideas. I would love to design a video game in the Magic the Gathering franchise. The other one is as a fan of JRPGs and a huge fan of psychology persona. I actually, at one point, I started learning Japanese so I could work on a Persona game.
Really?
Yeah.
How long did you learn Japanese?
About a year. My Japanese is still terrible. It's been like 2 years since I've done it. So, I know how to ask if they speak English. And that's about the extent of it.
All right, give us a piece of it.
Eigo ga hamase desu ka?
All right. I'm impressed. I always thought like, it's really a cool language and I would also like to learn it. But I was shocked when I saw coming to the writing part how diversified it is. And I was like, oh no.
Hiragana and katakana. Yeah.
I prefer Spanish or Italian. Italian is also a great language. But all right, maybe we see you one day fluently speaking Japanese.
Maybe.
All right, thanks for your time and enjoy your stay.
And thank you for the interview. It's been a real pleasure.
From me as well.